Welcome to Crime Scene X. In today's episode, we'll delve into 3 chilling true stories of nighttime drives. If these harrowing tales capture your interest, feel free to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more spine-tingling narratives. Now sit back and immerse yourself in the video. It was late, the kind of late where the world seems to hush, as if holding its breath. The moon, a thin crescent, barely illuminated the stretch of road that lay ahead, winding through an endless expanse of wilderness. I had been driving for hours, my mind weary from the monotony of the road trip. The comforting hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of the white lines on the road had become my world. Suddenly, my tranquility was shattered. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights, distant at first, but rapidly growing closer. I thought little of it at first, assuming it was just another traveler, eager to reach their destination, but something felt off. The car was gaining on me at an alarming speed, its bright lights blinding me. I gripped the steering wheel, unease turning to fear. The car was too close, aggressively tailgating me. I could see the outline of the driver, a shadowy figure obscured by the darkness. I accelerated, hoping to put some distance between us, but they matched my speed effortlessly. Then, without warning, they rammed into the back of my car. The impact was like a punch to the gut, my vehicle lurching forward. Panic surged through me. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. I tried to speed up, to escape, but they hit me again, harder this time. My car swerved, the world tilting dangerously as I struggled to maintain control. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I was in the middle of nowhere, alone and vulnerable. The nearest town was miles away, a mere speck on the vast canvas of wilderness. My phone, my only lifeline, was out of reach, having tumbled to the floor in the chaos. The car hit me again, a relentless predator. I felt the control slipping away as my car veered off the road, crashing through the underbrush. The world spun, a dizzying blur of dark trees and night sky. Then a sickening crunch as the car came to a jarring halt, the world plunging into silence. Dazed, I realized I was trapped. The other car had stopped, its headlights a pair of menacing eyes in the darkness. I could see the figure getting out, moving towards me with a deliberate, ominous gait. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a deafening drum in the silence of the night. I scrambled to unlock the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably, but it was too late. The figure was upon me, their face hidden in shadow, a nightmare made flesh. And in that moment, I knew true terror. The night had turned into a living horror, and I was its unwilling protagonist. As the figure approached, the moonlight revealed glimpses of a face twisted in malevolence. My breath hitched in my throat, my body frozen in fear. The stranger's movements were methodical, as if they relished the fear they instilled. In a desperate attempt to escape, I fumbled with the seatbelt, my fingers trembling. The car door wouldn't budge, damaged from the crash. I was a trapped animal, and my predator was closing in. The stranger reached the car, their hands pressing against the glass, eyes searching for mine in the darkness. I could feel their gaze piercing and cold. Then, by some miracle, the car's interior light flickered on, revealing the assailant's face. It was contorted with rage, unrecognizable. The stranger began to pound on the window, the sound echoing in the quiet night. I scoured the car for anything to defend myself with, my hands landing on a forgotten flashlight. It was a feeble weapon, but it was all I had. With a burst of adrenaline, I swung the flashlight, smashing the window. Glass shattered, raining down like a shower of ice. The stranger recoiled momentarily, giving me a chance to unlock the door and stumble out of the wreck. My legs were weak, but fear propelled me forward. I ran into the woods, the underbrush clawing at my clothes and skin. I could hear the stranger behind me, their footsteps a relentless drumbeat in pursuit. The woods were a labyrinth in the darkness, every direction looking the same. Branches snagged at my hair, roots tripped my feet. I was lost, disoriented, but I couldn't stop. Not when every rustle of leaves could be my pursuer closing in. My mind raced, trying to piece together why this was happening. Had I wronged someone unknowingly? Was this a case of mistaken identity? The questions swirled in my head, unanswered and tormenting. Then a glimmer of hope. In the distance, I saw lights, perhaps a house or a road. Salvation seemed within reach, but so was my pursuer. I could hear their breath, ragged and close. I pushed my body to its limits, lungs burning, legs aching. The lights grew brighter, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. Just as I thought I might escape, a hand grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back with terrifying strength. The hand on my shoulder was like a vice, its grip unyielding. I spun around, swinging the flashlight with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and the attacker staggered back, releasing their hold on me. For a moment, their silhouettes swayed in the dim light, and then they lunged at me again. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I dodged to the side, barely avoiding their grasp. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees witnesses to this nightmare. I realized then that reasoning with this person was impossible. This was a fight for survival, pure and simple. The attacker was relentless, driven by a madness I couldn't understand. Each swing, each movement was fueled by an unspoken rage. I ran again, but this time with a destination in mind. The lights were close, and I could see now that they were indeed a house. Help was within reach, if only I could get there in time. The attacker was close behind, their footsteps a constant reminder of the danger on my heels. I could see the house clearly now, a small, isolated cabin. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, my voice hoarse with fear. There was a moment, an agonizing wait, where nothing happened. Then the door swung open, and I fell inside, collapsing onto the floor. A startled couple stood before me, their expressions changing from surprise to horror as they saw the state I was in. They hurried to lock the door and call the police, while I lay there trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. The couple tended to me, offering water and comfort, their faces etched with concern. As we waited for the police to arrive, I peeked through the window. The attacker was nowhere to be seen, as if they had vanished into the night. But the threat they posed still hung in the air, a palpable dread that lingered. When the police finally arrived, they searched the area but found no one. The attacker had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of chaos and fear. I gave my statement, my hands still trembling, the events of the night spilling out in a frantic torrent. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying the night's events, each detail a sharp jab of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Even in the safety of my own home, the shadows seemed to whisper secrets, secrets of the terror that had unfolded. The identity of my attacker remained a mystery, their motives unknown and haunting. The night had revealed a darkness I never knew existed, both in the world and within myself. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that some horrors don't end when the sun rises. They linger, hidden in the corners of our minds, waiting. And the scariest part is not knowing if they will ever come back. The highway stretched before me, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of nowhere. It was well past midnight, and the only companions I had were the occasional blinks of distant stars. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the road lulling me into a sense of detachment from the world. Suddenly, the car gave a sputter, jolting me back to reality. I glanced at the fuel gauge. It was perilously close to empty. "Not now," I muttered, anxiety creeping into my voice. But the car, indifferent to my plea, coughed a final protest before coasting to a stop. I was stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere. I tried my phone, but of course there was no signal. The darkness around me felt oppressive, like a thick blanket smothering my hopes of a quick rescue. I locked the doors and settled in, hoping that by some miracle, a car would pass by. Time dragged on, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. The silence of the night was broken only by the occasional rustle of wind. Just when I was about to give up hope, headlights pierced the darkness. A car was approaching. Relief washed over me as it slowed down and pulled up alongside. The driver rolled down his window, and in the dim light I could see his face, weathered and friendly enough. "Need some help?" he asked in a gravelly voice. I hesitated for a moment, but desperation won over. I explained my situation, and he offered to drive me to the nearest gas station. Grateful, I got out of my car and climbed into his. As we drove, the initial relief I felt began to ebb away, replaced by an uneasy feeling. The man kept glancing at me, his eyes lingering a bit too long. His questions started innocently enough, about where I was from and where I was headed, but then they took a strange turn, becoming more personal, more probing. I answered as politely as I could, while trying to mask my growing discomfort. The interior of his car was cluttered, and there was a peculiar odor that I couldn't quite place. The more he talked, the more I realized something was off. His laughter was too loud, his gaze too intense. I looked around, trying to gauge how far we were from civilization. It felt like we were driving further away from the main road, the surrounding darkness becoming more complete, more suffocating. I clutched the door handle, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. As the car continued to weave through the desolate roads, the man's demeanor shifted drastically. His initial friendly facade melted away, revealing a much more menacing character. He began to talk in a low, unnerving tone, sharing explicit and disturbing stories about his past encounters on the road. Each story was more unsettling than the last, filled with details that made my skin crawl. I tried to keep my composure, but my heart was racing. His eyes, which had been merely unsettling before, now glinted with a sinister light. He occasionally laughed to himself, a sound that was more a growl than a chuckle. It was clear this was no ordinary ride. I was trapped with someone who seemed to relish in instilling fear. I furtively reached for my phone, but he noticed. In an instant, he snatched it from my hand and tossed it into the back seat, out of my reach. "No distractions," he said, his voice cold and threatening. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. This was more than just a creepy encounter. It was a dangerous situation. As we drove further, he began to ask me personal, invasive questions, his tone implying that he wasn't interested in polite answers. I gave vague responses, but he seemed to enjoy my discomfort. At one point, he leaned over and whispered, "You know, out here, nobody can hear you scream." That was the final straw. I knew I had to escape before it was too late. I waited for the car to slow down at a curve, and in a moment of sheer desperation, I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and threw myself out of the moving car. I hit the ground hard, rolling across the rough pavement, feeling the scrapes and bruises forming on my skin. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the dense woods beside the road, not daring to look back. I could hear him yelling, his voice laced with anger and surprise, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping against my face, the sounds of the night amplifying my fear. I had no idea where I was going, but my only thought was to put as much distance as possible between myself and that man. After what felt like hours, exhausted and disoriented, I emerged onto a different, less isolated road, just as the first light of dawn was breaking. I flagged down a passing truck, the driver immediately noticing my distressed state. He called the police, and I was taken to a nearby station. The police took my statement and promised to investigate, but I knew that the man in his car would haunt my thoughts for a long time. I had escaped, but the fear and the feeling of vulnerability remained. As I merged onto the desolate highway, the darkness seemed to swallow my car whole. The clock on the dashboard glowed 11:47 p.m., casting an eerie light on the empty passenger seat beside me. I'd driven this route countless times before, but tonight, something felt unsettlingly different. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of tires rolling over scattered pebbles. Each mile seemed to stretch longer than the last, and the sense of isolation deepened with every passing moment. The moon was a mere sliver, barely shedding any light on the road ahead, making the shadows around me appear denser, almost tangible. My headlights cut through the night, revealing nothing but the endless stretch of road. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, unmoving. As I drew closer, I could make out the outline of a person standing in the middle of my lane. Heart pounding, I slowed down, wondering why someone would be out here at this ungodly hour. The figure remained motionless as I approached, its features obscured in the darkness. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Just as I was about to come to a complete stop, the guy darted towards the car, their face twisted in desperation. I swerved instinctively, narrowly avoiding a collision. In the rearview mirror, I watched the man recede into the night, their presence leaving a chilling echo in the silent void of the highway. Shaken, I pressed harder on the accelerator, eager to put as much distance between myself and the unsettling encounter. The night seemed to grow darker, the road more treacherous, and the feeling of dread in my stomach more pronounced. I couldn't help but glance back at the mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see the figure reappear. The road ahead was long, and I was suddenly acutely aware of how alone I was. As I sped away, my heart raced uncontrollably. The encounter with the terrifying individual on the road had jolted me into a state of heightened alertness. I couldn't shake off the image of their desperate, wild-eyed expression as they lunged at my car. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made it impossible to focus on anything but the road ahead, yet my mind replayed the scene over and over. I tried to convince myself it was just a hitchhiker or a lost traveler, but the intensity in their eyes suggested something more sinister. The way they had appeared out of nowhere and their aggressive approach was unnerving. The isolation of the road, once a peaceful respite, now felt menacing, as if it concealed untold dangers. The trees lining the highway seemed to close in around me, their branches casting ghostly shadows that danced across the pavement. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig from the surrounding woods made me jump, my gaze darting frantically to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that person pursuing me. As I continued driving, the quiet was suddenly shattered by a loud thump from the back of the car. My heart leapt into my throat. I glanced in the mirror but saw nothing. The fear of what might be lurking outside gripped me. Was it my imagination, or had something or someone attached themselves to my car when I swerved to avoid them? Panic set in as I considered the possibility. I decided to increase my speed, hoping to leave behind whatever might be haunting me. But as if in response to my growing fear, the car began to sputter, the engine emitting a series of coughs before falling into a disturbing silence. I steered the now powerless vehicle to the side of the road, my hands shaking. Sitting in the dead car, the darkness outside felt oppressive, like a thick blanket smothering me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling, only to find no signal. The isolation of the road, once a mere inconvenience, now felt like a trap. I strained my ears for any sound of movement outside, but there was only silence. The eerie quiet was more terrifying than any noise. I locked the doors and tried to start the car again, but it was futile. The engine remained silent, unresponsive. Minutes passed, each one stretching into an eternity. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. Maybe I could walk to find help. But the thought of leaving the safety of the car, of exposing myself to the vast, dark unknown, was paralyzing. Then a soft sound broke the silence. A deliberate, dragging step coming from behind the car. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Through the rearview mirror, I could barely make out a shadowy figure approaching. It was the same person. I was sure of it. Their movements were slow, almost taunting. I ducked down in my seat, hoping to hide myself from view. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give away my presence. The steps grew closer, deliberate and unnerving. Then, they stopped. Silence again, but this time it was heavier, filled with unspoken threats. I dared not move, not even to peek over the dashboard. Time seemed to stop as I waited, every nerve in my body on edge. The fear of the unknown, of what this person wanted, gnawed at my mind, leaving me trapped in a nightmare of my own making. The next moment felt like an eternity, the suspense a tangible force inside the car. The silence was suffocating, the darkness a relentless foe. I was alone, utterly alone, with a stranger lurking in the shadows. The night had turned into a living horror, a terrifying ordeal with no apparent end. As I lay crouched in the car, the minutes ticked by like hours, each second amplifying my fear. My mind raced with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. Just when I thought I couldn't bear the silence any longer, a faint tapping began. It started on the roof, a slow, methodical rhythm that scared the hell out of me. I held my breath, hoping the person would think the car was empty and leave. But the tapping persisted, moving from the roof to the windows, a taunting, ghostly sound in the dead of night. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the tapping ceased. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Slowly, I mustered the courage to peek over the dashboard. There was no sign of the person. The road was bathed in moonlight, empty and silent. I couldn't understand what had just happened. Was it a warning, a threat, or simply a mind game meant to terrify me? The not knowing was the worst part. I realized I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed to act. With trembling hands, I grabbed the car's flashlight and opened the door. The night air was cold and still. I shone the light around, half expecting to see the person jump out from the shadows, but there was nothing, only the quiet road and the dense woods. I checked the car and found the problem. One of the wires that connects to the battery had come loose, so I pushed it back down and tightened it with my fingers. Without wasting another second, I drove off, leaving the haunting experience behind. As the car gained speed, I felt a surge of adrenaline and determination. I was no longer the scared person hiding in the car. I had faced my fear, however inexplicable and terrifying it was. The rest of the drive was a blur. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my home, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. The night's events felt surreal, like a bad dream, but the relief of being safe was overwhelming. I never took that road again at night, and the memory of the person and the tapping haunted me for a long time. But I learned something vital that night, that in the face of fear, we find an inner strength we never knew we had. And sometimes, the real horror isn't the darkness outside, it's the fear we hold inside. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please like the video, comment what you thought, and subscribe for daily uploads.